Hello everyone, and welcome to our first socially distanced tutorial for the course on natural resource governance in a complex world. My name is Mindy Schneider, and I'm co-teaching this course along with Dick Roth, and coming to you today from my house in Amsterdam. It's very awkward to lecture into a computer and to see my face reflecting back at me rather than to be in a room with other people whose faces I can look at and see if we're connecting or not. So if this feels awkward for you, it also feels awkward for me. And together, let's just make it through this awkward arrangement for our courses. I hope that you have a nice place to be studying and working. And I hope that you have a good internet connection to be able to get all of the content. And I hope that you will make use of our discussion forums on Brightspace, which we've set up for each lecture and for each tutorial as a place where you can post questions or comments or things that aren't clear that you'd like more information on, more direction on, and think of those discussion forum spaces for the moment as the place of virtual hand raising and virtual discussion. And we'll also be looking into those boards frequently to see what kind of issues come up. So in this video, I want to briefly introduce myself, introduce the tutorials for the course in general, and introduce the content of this tutorial in particular, which I've put into a series of 4 PowerPoint presentations that are uploaded on Brightspace. So first, to introduce myself a bit, I mentioned that my name is Mindy Schneider, and that is still true 2 minutes later. I'm an assistant professor of agrarian sociology and rural development in the Sociology of Development and Change group here at Wageningen. You can probably tell that I am American. I grew up in a small town on the Great Plains in Nebraska, which was one of those massive states with not very many people in the middle of the country. My PhD is in development sociology, which I did at Cornell University in New York State. And before coming to Wageningen, I was assistant professor at the International Institute of Social Studies in The Hague for 5 years. So I've been living in the Netherlands for about 6 years. My research centers on questions of capitalist transformations of the countryside, which I study through political economy and political ecology lenses, trying to understand how, by whom, with what consequences, and with what contestations capitalism transforms the rural sphere. Geographically, most of my work has taken place in China. I lived and worked in China for 2.5 years, where I was studying the social and the ecological transformations that have accompanied the industrialization of pig farming there over the past 30 to 40 years. I also work on a project called the Commodity Frontiers Initiative with a group of 3 historians, where we're trying to chart 600 years of capitalist history from the perspective of the countryside. In this course, I will be teaching 3 sessions of the overall lecture. I'll be teaching a session on the political ecology of resource governance, a session on land conflicts and dispossession, and a session on the idea of environmental states and authoritarianism. And in this second to the last lecture, I'll bring in some work on China. I'm also teaching in this tutorial, obviously, here we are, and in this first tutorial, which is sort of an introduction to academic writing and argument in particular. So the Land and Water Management group, or team, they requested that we focus more centrally on writing in this course and offer tutorials and also offer opportunities for you to develop and practice writing skills. We were very happy to take on this request. For one, Dick has taught writing as various components of his courses for a number of years. I have taught undergraduate writing courses focused just on writing, for a couple of years, and both of us find that teaching writing is a very important and sometimes under-focused area of university education. So we are developing this course on writing, these tutorials on writing, first because you can't go through university without having to do quite a lot of writing. And this is often something that people assume, well, students just know how to write, right? Everyone's gone through school up to this point, so of course you know how to write. The problem with that is that, yes, everyone knows how to write, but everyone doesn't necessarily know how to write academic papers, how to argue convincingly, how to structure papers in a way that revolves around the claims that you're trying to make and the evidence that you're corralling to support and to make those claims. So we see writing as a fundamental academic skill in university education. And the other reason that we were very keen and excited to take on this training in writing is that as we find ourselves in a post-truth world where emotion more than fact or more than evidence seems to have more influence, especially in the public sphere, we find it very important that students learn how to, again, make arguments, make claims, support them with evidence, but also learn how to be very good critical readers of arguments, to be able to sort of parse out what aligns with something that we might call truth and what aligns with something that we might call post-truth, and also to really understand that those are quite contested terms in and of themselves, that the relationship between truth and post-truth is also quite complicated. So we get into that a bit in the tutorial, but also in the paper that you'll be reading for this session. Now, I have, as I mentioned, I've prepared 4 different PowerPoint presentations trying to parse the information that I want to get across to you into more manageable or digestible bits. So there's 4 separate presentations, each oriented around one part of this idea of introducing the art and science, we might call it, of argument. I'll give you a little preview of the content there just to help you as you get into those presentations. So the first PowerPoint presentation is entitled or is working around the idea that everything is an argument. So in those slides, I give a definition of an argument, especially as we use argument in academic writing, and go through very briefly some of the reasons that we argue: to convince, to persuade, to inform, to make a decision. And there's also some examples of these forms of argument, not just from academic work, but from places like Twitter. I've used quite a few examples related to COVID, because that's the thing that's on all of our minds at the moment. And also there's quite a lot of good illustrations of these different forms of argument. So the goal really of that first presentation is to help you start to see the social worlds that you inhabit as being full of arguments rather than full of just facts or just information, to really see that everything from a tweet to an advertisement to a media article to our academic work is an argument. The second presentation, PowerPoint presentation, is about reading. I called it Consuming Arguments and Reading to Write. The tutorials in this class indeed are focused on writing, right? We're trying to help teach you some of the fundamental skills of academic writing, but reading and writing are in fact intimately related. And this might seem like a very simple point, that of course reading and writing are related, right? What we mean here is that critical reading is part of learning how to write arguments. So the slides introduce you to, oh, there we go. My screensaver just turned on. Hopefully this will not cause a problem. In the slides, we introduce you to the idea of what it means to read critically, meaning what it means to be able to read something, again, a tweet, but really we're working up to academic articles, and to be able to identify the key argument, the evidence used to support that argument, the ways in which the author arrived at the evidence and the argument, and to also look for sometimes the deeper or the unstated meanings that are coming through the argument. Now, eventually, of course, the goal is that we are able to critically consume these arguments and also to evaluate them, which is something that comes with being more familiar with how fields and communities of scholars in particular fields and disciplines, how they do their work, the kinds of debates, the kinds of concepts that they're using, and the kinds of conversations that they're entering into. And so the first sort of skill to be able to do that is to develop the skill of critical reading. So in the slides, I've offered several practical strategies for reading critically. And some of these are very practical in terms of, okay, what's the most sensible order through which you might approach an academic article? And this critical reading is also particularly important as you start reading social science papers, which I imagine that most of you in the course are not in social science majors. And I know that when you start encountering social science literature, it can seem very opaque and very difficult to get through. So the point here is to learn how to not get hung up on all of the terminologies and the concepts that you may not fully understand, and be able to still identify what's the key argument as a first point before you maybe understand everything about the points that the author is making, right? So to, again, identify what the argument is. Okay, those slides are meant to help you do that, and if it's something you already know how to do, bravo. I imagine also all of us can continue to develop these skills. Okay, the third PowerPoint presentation then is really the meat of the tutorial. This is about producing arguments in writing. So when we think about academic writing, good academic writing, this isn't about punctuation, it's not about grammar, it's not about spelling. Those things should be assumed. If you do a poor job of spelling or following grammatical rules, that will surely influence the person or people reading what you write in a particular way, not a particularly positive way. But good academic writing is not just those kinds of nuts and bolts. Again, good academic writing, and at the university level, is about argument. It's about your ability to make a claim and to defend that claim with evidence. So indeed, the paper that you write for this course will require you to make a claim and to defend it with evidence. You'll get practice at doing this along the way. Now, the claims that you make in your essays need to also be related to a literature, need to be related to some of the papers that we read in the course, for instance, some of the concepts that social scientists use to think through land and water politics and issues of natural resource governance. Now, this kind of argument is something that social scientists do, but it's also something that natural scientists do. If you look at kind of the structure of any academic paper, you'll see that it starts with an overall introduction where typically the argument is stated very clearly, and sometimes the argument looks more like findings, but stating your findings is also an argument. And then there's a section on literature review. And the literature review section is where scholars identify who it is that they are in conversation with, who they're debating, who they are agreeing with, whose work they're building on, whose work they are using as a springboard to launch their own studies. And these studies could be in a lab, these studies could be a series of interviews, these studies could be ethnographies, right? So just to say that there's something about this logic of argument that applies to all academic research, whether it's in the natural or social sciences. We're going to use in this course some inspiration from the book They Say, I Say by Graff and Birkenstein, which Dick sent to you as a PDF. We had some trouble getting an ebook through the library, so just sent it to you as PDF instead. Now, their argument in this book is that academic writing and academic argument is always a conversation. And this is the heart of their book. They say, I say, meaning that writing is all about identifying what they say, meaning these other scholars whose work you're using or that you're contesting, as a way to set up what you say. And this is a very, perhaps overly simplified way of describing this relationship. But this book is very clearly written and includes a number of templates that you can use in your own writing as a way to set up your own arguments. So I find it very useful. I've used it in the past when I've taught writing, and students always respond very positively to the book. So I've marked out places in the PowerPoint where there are particular chapters in the book that speak directly to whichever skill that we're talking about, be it summarizing or quoting. But again, the idea here of producing arguments in writing is about engaging in a conversation, which we might call a scholarly debate. It's about positioning yourself and your research in relation to what other colleagues in your field are doing. If you're an academic researcher, if you're a student writing in this field, it also means that you are positioning your paper that you write, like your course paper. You're positioning it in relation to published literature, published debates, published concepts that scholars use, but you're in conversation with it. Hopefully this is crystal clear, but again, if it's not, please make use of the discussion forums. Okay, so finally, the fourth PowerPoint presentation is on post-truth, a little introduction to this idea of post-truth that I mentioned, and the summary assignment that will be your first assignment for the course. So, the slides introduce what we mean by post-truth. If perhaps this is a new concept to you, post-truth was the Oxford Dictionary word of the year in 2016 after it was used so much in the context of Brexit and the United States presidential election. And again, the idea of post-truth is that we have this era where emotions are more influential in public opinion than facts. And what that means for politics, of course, is something that people are quite concerned about and have been writing quite a lot about, but also what it means for academic research. If, as I've said, academic research and writing is all about making arguments, making claims and supporting them with evidence, and that somehow you get to a strong argument that sets the tone for these scholarly conversations, what does being in a post-truth era mean for that? Is it just that we need to return to a time when we just used our unassailable facts to begin and end these kinds of conversations? Or is it a bit more complicated than that? Is truth and post-truth a bit more complicated than it seems on the surface? And that's exactly what you'll read about in the article by Rose from 2018, which your assignment is to write a summary of that article. So again, in those slides, it goes through a little bit about post-truth, and then you'll see some instructions for your first assignment, which is to write the summary. This assignment is also posted on Brightspace with the course content, the more detailed instructions. But in general, your assignment is to write a very short 400 to 500 word summary of the Rose article. And we hit screensaver again. To write a very short and concise summary of this article, again, to develop that first skill of critical reading. The assignment is not to review the article, it is not to critique the article, it is to write a summary, to try to suspend your own beliefs and your own perspectives and really be able to concisely and in your own words reproduce what Rose's central argument is. You might find that this is one of those papers that's a bit difficult to read when you are not accustomed to reading social scientific papers. So I would really implore you to follow some of those strategies that are offered in the second PowerPoint about reading, to take notes as you go, to look for what are the key concepts, to try to really map out the overall argument. And again, to not get weighted down by all of the concepts that you may not understand. It's always good if you find a key concept that you don't understand to look it up and try to figure out kind of what the concept is doing, right? How the author is using the concept. But the point is not that you are able to read and reproduce this article fully, right? You're not going to be examined on memorizing this article. The idea is to try to understand what the argument is. This should be coming clear now because I think I have said this probably 10 to 15 times already. And there was another awkward moment of looking at myself while lecturing. So, in summary, what I would suggest for you to do is to first watch this video, then to go through all of the slides, all 4 of the PowerPoint slides. They're short, they're each about 18 to 20 slides that include examples. And again, they're in 4 kind of digestible parts, so take a break between each of the parts. Okay, so go through those slides. Then I would suggest reading chapter 2 of They Say, I Say, which is a chapter on the art of summarizing. It's very helpful and very useful for your assignment. Then I would go to the Rose piece, the Rose 2008 article. Yes. Take notes as you read, and then finally I would write the summary. And again, this is a very short summary, but a lot of information has to be packed into that 400 or 500 words. So it requires you to be very precise and very careful with what you actually choose to pull out and to discuss in your essay. Okay, I will leave you with that. I will now upload all of this content to Brightspace. I wish you very good luck. And again, please contact us in the discussion forums if there are questions or things that aren't clear. So, good luck, enjoy, and we will see you on this space again.